The car door slammed, rattling the old sedan as I climbed out, my carefully polished shoes catching on the gravel. Paul, my father, stood waiting on the porch, his eyes already on the younger, brighter model beside me. He didn't even glance at my own pristine vehicle, the one I'd worked 3 summers for. "That old heap you're driving, Hank," he said, shaking his head at my carefully restored pickup. "Darlene's new convertible certainly makes more of a statement, doesn't it?" I must have been 5, maybe 6, when I first understood it, not with words, but with the quiet air in the house. Paul and Martha, my parents, moved through the small rooms of our Iowa farmhouse with a certain weight, a kind of unspoken longing. It wasn't for me, I knew that much. They looked at me, young Hank Albright, with something akin to politeness, but never the spark of recognition I saw in other parents' eyes when they looked at their boys. There were whispers I sometimes caught, phrases like "another boy" or "hoped for a girl," muttered under their breath after I'd been sent to bed, the words drifting up through the floorboards. My birth hadn't been a celebration. It had been a confirmation of a miscalculation, a quiet disappointment that settled over the house like an early autumn frost. That indifference wasn't sudden. It bloomed slow, like weeds in a neglected garden. I learned quickly that my accomplishments, small or large, were met with the same placid stare. I'd bring home a drawing from kindergarten, a crayon house with a crooked chimney, and Martha would nod, say, "That's nice, dear," before stacking it neatly in a drawer, never to be seen again. Paul would barely look up from his newspaper. I tried to be a good kid. I cleaned my plate, helped Martha carry groceries, even polished Paul's work boots without being asked. I wanted a flicker, a small warmth in their eyes, a touch on my shoulder that wasn't just to tell me to move. But their gaze always slid past me, seeking something else, something not there. Then when I was 6, Darlene arrived. It was like the sun had finally broken through the clouds for Paul and Martha. From the moment she was brought home, swaddled in a pink blanket, the house shifted. The silence that had always enveloped me shattered. Martha cooed, Paul beamed, his rough hands surprisingly gentle as he held the tiny bundle. Darlene was their golden child, the apple of their eye, every gurgle a symphony, every yawn a miracle. It was immediate, stark. I watched them, a quiet observer, as their world, once so gray, burst into a spectrum of color, a color that only Darlene could reflect. Darlene grew, and with her the spoiling intensified. She was a whirlwind of glitter and noise, her tantrums at home legendary, her school reports consistently flagging. Yet every misstep was cushioned, every error explained away. "She's just full of life," Martha would say, smoothing Darlene's hair after she tipped over a vase, shattering it on the polished floor. "A spirited child," Paul would chuckle, even when the teacher called on to report Darlene had poured juice on another student's textbook. There was no discipline, no stern word, only excuses, a constant reinterpretation of reality where Darlene was always the misunderstood genius, the innocent victim. I tried a couple of times to point out the obvious. When Darlene scribbled all over my freshly completed homework, ruining the pages, I showed it to Paul. He glanced at the defaced paper, then at Darlene, who was already fluttering her eyelashes. "She's just a child, Hank," he said, his voice sharp, a cold edge I rarely heard directed at Darlene. "You're older, you should know better than to leave things where she can reach them." Then almost as an afterthought, he added, "You were just an accident anyway. You should be grateful you're here at all." The words, delivered flat and precise, cut deeper than any strap. Darlene's birthdays were extravagant affairs. Backyard parties with ponies and bouncy castles. Piles of brightly wrapped gifts. One year, Paul bought her a small, cherry-red convertible pedal car, complete with working headlights. My own birthdays, in contrast, were marked by a single cake, often store-bought, and a utilitarian gift, a new pair of jeans, a practical sweater. "You need these more than toys, Hank," Martha would explain, her voice even. My academic achievements, the hours spent hunched over books, the strayed A's on my report cards, were met with a perfunctory nod. "That's what you're supposed to do," Paul would say, turning back to his television program. Darlene, meanwhile, would get effusive praise for a C-, showing real potential, Martha insisted. As she grew, Darlene became exactly what their constant indulgence had shaped her to be: disdainful, frivolous, utterly self-absorbed. Her grades remained dismal, her interests narrow. Clothes, boys, whatever shiny new thing she could cajole from Paul or Martha. She existed in a bubble of her own importance, oblivious to anyone else, especially me. By the time I was 18, graduating high school with honors, accepting a scholarship to the state university, Darlene was 12, a preteen terror still throwing fits if she didn't get her way. She still had poor grades, still expected everyone to cater to her whims. I watched her, this loud, demanding girl, as I packed my few belongings into an old suitcase. The realization settled in me like a stone. I was utterly eclipsed. No matter what I did, how hard I tried, how much I achieved, their love, their attention, would always gravitate toward her. It was a heavy truth, but undeniable. It was the summer after my sophomore year, a humid August evening, when I sat down at the kitchen table. Paul was reading the farm reports. Martha was knitting, her needles clicking softly. I cleared my throat. I'm 20 now, I started, trying to keep my voice even, and I'm doing well at college. I've got a scholarship, but it doesn't cover everything. Not for medicine. I was hoping you might be able to help with the tuition, maybe a loan. I thought it was a simple, logical request, despite everything that had come before. Paul lowered his newspaper, his eyes flat. College fund? He repeated, a hint of something I couldn't quite place in his voice. Martha put down her knitting. Hank, she said, her tone devoid of warmth, your grandparents, Frank and Helen, they saw this coming. They always knew you were different. They set up a fund for you specifically for your education. It's separate from anything else. We never had to touch it. The words hit me. Frank and Helen Albright, my paternal grandparents. They were the only ones who had ever offered me a true hug, a genuine smile. I remembered Frank's booming laugh, the way he'd let me steer the tractor around the back 40. Helen's hands, soft and flour-dusted, baking my favorite apple pie. Their house had always smelled of cinnamon and wood smoke, a stark, painful contrast to the perpetual coldness of my own home. They had seen me, truly seen me, and planned for me. A knot of frustration tightened in my stomach, but beneath it, a strange sense of vindication, of being cared for, however distantly. I packed my worn duffel bag and left for college, the anger a dull throb, but the discovery of my grandparents' foresight. A strange comfort. On campus, away from the watchful, unseeing eyes of my parents, I found a different kind of happiness, a sense of freedom. It wasn't loud or boisterous. It was the quiet contentment of finally breathing easy. I worked hard, studied harder, pouring myself into my courses, eager to make the most of the future my grandparents had secured. It was in an organic chemistry lab, amidst the clinking of beakers and the smell of ethanol, that I met Mary Beth Jensen. She was precise, diligent, her dark hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail, her glasses often smudged with chalk. She came from a small farming town, just like me, but with a different kind of grit. She was working her way through on a scholarship. Every penny counted. Her honesty was refreshing, her intelligence undeniable. We started talking over late-night study sessions, sharing instant coffee and whispered anxieties about exams. I was drawn to her steady gaze, her practical outlook, the quiet strength that hummed beneath her reserved exterior. Our relationship deepened, slowly, truly, like good roots settling into rich soil. We both studied medicine, our paths converging yet distinct. I found my calling in the intricate mechanics of the human body, dreaming of a surgeon's precise hands, a life of profound impact. Mary Beth, with her keen eye for detail and her gentle nature, was drawn to ophthalmology, the delicate work of preserving sight. We supported each other, pushing through exhaustion, celebrating small victories. One crisp autumn evening, after we'd both received acceptance letters into our respective medical residencies, we were sitting on a park bench, the campus lights glowing soft around us. Honey, I said, a hopeful lump in my throat, I'll soon introduce you to my folks. And when we finish, when we're both doctors, I'll marry you. What do you say? Mary Beth turned to me, her face alight, a pure, unadulterated joy that melted away years of my own chill. "I'm so happy, Hank," she whispered, leaning her head on my shoulder. "I just hope your parents will like me." There was a small tremor in her voice, a flicker of apprehension I couldn't quite reassure away. Introducing Mary Beth to Paul and Martha was exactly as I'd feared. I told them about her family, her scholarship, her determination. They were polite, of course, their Midwestern manners impeccable, but the disappointment hung thick in the air, a visible mist. Martha's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Paul's handshake was brief, almost perfunctory. Mary Beth, sensing the unspoken judgment, kept her answers short, her usual easy laughter subdued. After she'd left, driving her old Ford Focus back to her own apartment, the polite facade shattered. Paul slammed his fist on the kitchen counter. "Listen, Hank," he erupted, his voice vibrating with suppressed anger. "You couldn't have chosen anything better? What are you thinking? Staying with a girl who will at best be a low-class doctor? What a shame." Martha nodded silently, her lips a thin line. I felt a surge of cold fury. "Listen, Dad," I said, my voice low but firm. "We don't choose when we fall in love. True love simply happens. It's not about how much money her parents have or what kind of doctor she'll be in your eyes. I don't want to please anyone but myself. I want to be truly happy." Darlene, now a self-satisfied teenager, was slouched on the sofa, scrolling through her phone. She barely acknowledged Mary Beth, treating her with a dismissive shrug, secure in her position as the unassailable family favorite. Her contempt was palpable, a silent judgment that mirrored Paul and Martha's. Paul and Martha, their pride bruised by my defiance, by Mary Beth's humble background, reluctantly accepted the union. Their faces remained tight with unspoken disapproval, a silent testament to the chasm that would forever exist between us. Graduation came and went, a blur of caps and gowns. Mary Beth and I didn't waste time. We'd both secured excellent residency positions, mine in general surgery at the university hospital, hers in ophthalmology at a reputable clinic nearby. We were young, driven, and full of the quiet ambition that comes from starting with little. Our wedding was simple, held in a small church on the edge of town, just a handful of friends and a few colleagues. Paul and Martha sat in the front pew, their faces etched with a visible, frustrated look, as if they were enduring a mandatory civic duty rather than celebrating their son's most important day. Darlene, now a fully fledged teenager, spent most of the ceremony on her phone, occasionally rolling her eyes. Mary Beth, ever gracious, smiled warmly at them, but their stony expressions didn't waver. For a time, we lived in the Albright mansion. It was a large house, more than enough space for everyone, but the air inside was thin and cold. Mary Beth tried, she truly did. She offered to help Martha with dinner, made conversation with Paul, even attempted to engage Darlene. But the family's indifference was like a constant chill, seeping into the corners of every room. Martha would politely decline help, Paul would offer monosyllabic answers, and Darlene would simply ignore her, treating her like an unwelcome shadow. I saw the quiet pain in Mary Beth's eyes, the way her shoulders would slump slightly after another failed attempt to connect. One evening, I couldn't take it anymore. I walked into the living room where Paul and Martha sat, Darlene sprawled on the couch watching television. "What's wrong with you all?" I asked, my voice low but strained. "Mary Beth is my wife. She's a good person. Why can't you treat her with a shred of decency?" Paul just looked at me over his reading glasses, Martha continued her knitting, and Darlene merely snorted. Their silence was a brick wall, impenetrable. Later that night, as we lay in bed, the heavy silence of the mansion pressing in, I turned to Mary Beth. "Honey," I began, my voice a whisper, "we're doing well in our careers. We're both making good money. We have options. I think we should leave this mansion. I don't want our kids, when we have them, growing up in this toxic environment. Not like this." Mary Beth was quiet for a moment, her breath soft against my ear. "Hank," she finally said, her voice laced with a subtle worry, "won't they think I'm breaking up the family, driving a wedge between you and your parents?" I knew she meant well, but the thought of staying, of inflicting this coldness on our future children, was unbearable. "No," I said, my resolve firm. "This isn't breaking up anything. This is building something better, something of our own." She paused again, then squeezed my hand. Honey, wherever you go, I will go. Her quiet strength was always a balm. We saved diligently, pooling every extra dollar, every bonus, every unexpected payment. Our work was demanding, our hours long, but the goal of our own home kept us focused. Within 2 years, we found it, a spacious, beautiful house on the edge of a quiet, tree-lined street, a short drive from the hospital and clinic. It was everything we wanted, bright, welcoming, a place where peace and polite distance from the Albrights could finally flourish. I went to Paul and Martha standing in their living room to announce our departure. I expected fury, an explosion of anger at my perceived betrayal. Instead, I received utter indifference. Good luck, Paul said, not looking up from his newspaper. Martha simply nodded, her needles clicking on, her face impassive. It was a cold, lifeless farewell, devoid of emotion, devoid of connection. We left, taking only what was ours, leaving the mansion and its ghost behind. We maintained only occasional empty visits with Paul and Martha, mostly out of a sense of obligation. During those strained dinners, I couldn't help but notice how their eyes still shone with an almost childish adoration for Darlene, still their golden daughter, even as she grew into a woman who took their love and gave nothing in return. It solidified my decision to reduce contact, to protect my burgeoning family from that pervasive chill. Then, fate, in its quiet way, brought us pure joy. Mary Beth became pregnant. The news filled me with a profound, almost dizzying happiness. Holding her hand as we saw the first ultrasound, a tiny flickering heartbeat on the screen, I felt a promise form in my soul. Whether it's a boy or a girl, I whispered, tears pricking my eyes. I'll love our child with all my heart and soul, unconditionally. We shared the news with Paul and Martha. Congratulations, Martha said, her voice flat, her eyes scanning past us. Paul grunted. It was exactly as I expected, and yet it still stung. A small gender reveal party followed, just Mary Beth and me, some friends from work, and a blue cake. Paul and Martha didn't show, citing vague plans. Our son, Cody, arrived first, a healthy, boisterous boy with Mary Beth's eyes. 2 years later, our daughter, Sarah Jean, completed our family, her tiny hands grasping my finger. Holding them, feeling their warmth, their absolute trust, I vowed with every fiber of my being to break the cycle of favoritism. My children would know they were loved, truly and completely, simply for being who they were. I poured myself into being a father, a husband. Cody and Sarah Jean filled our home with laughter, crayon drawings, and the kind of unconditional love I'd yearned for my entire life. I watched them play, listened to their stories, and made sure every single day they knew they were cherished, equally and completely, without a hint of the favoritism that had shaped my own childhood. Mary Beth was the perfect partner, her calm strength a constant anchor. Paul and Martha, meanwhile, remained distant grandparents. Their visits were infrequent, often during holidays, and always felt more like obligations. They would bring a token gift, a quickly chosen toy, and then retreat into themselves, offering polite but minimal interaction with the children. Cody and Sarah Jean, thankfully, seemed largely oblivious to their grandparents' detached demeanor, accustomed to the warmth of our own home. These interactions were purely performative, devoid of genuine connection, ticking a box on a social checklist. Then, on Cody's 6th birthday, the call came. It was the sheriff's department. Paul and Martha, they said, had been in a head-on collision on Highway 21, just outside town. Both gone. My stomach dropped. Despite the decades of emotional distance, the quiet disappointments, the deep-seated resentments, a sudden sharp grief pierced through me. They were still my parents. They were gone. The finality of it was crushing. Mary Beth, ever my rock, held me through the initial shock. Her support was unwavering as I took on the difficult task of organizing the funeral. It was a traditional Midwestern affair, a viewing at the funeral home, a service at the old church, followed by a quiet burial. I stood at the podium, looking out at the faces, some familiar, some strangers, and delivered a eulogy that spoke of their hard work, their contribution to the community, their roles as my parents. It was a difficult tribute, balancing truth with propriety, leaving unspoken the hollow spaces they had left in my heart. After the dust settled, after the last casseroles were delivered and the last sympathies offered, the family gathered. It was a week later in Mr. Peterson's law office, a room smelling faintly of old paper and dust. Mary Beth sat beside me, her hand a warm weight on my knee. Darlene was there too, fidgeting, looking bored. The reading of the will, a grim formality, began. Mr. Peterson, a man whose voice usually held a dry, legalistic drone, began to read Paul and Martha's final, carefully worded wishes. The legalese washed over me at first, until he reached my name. To our son, Hank Albright, he read, his voice surprisingly clear. Even though you made unpleasant decisions that disappointed us, we did what we could for you in our own way. I stiffened. Unpleasant decisions. Even in death, their judgment lingered. Then came the crushing blow, the words that would echo for years. Mr. Peterson continued, his eyes not quite meeting mine. Therefore, we leave you $500,000 in a dinner at a fancy restaurant. That's what you deserve, so people can't say we were cruel. A stunned silence fell over the room. The air grew heavy, the raw insult hanging thick and undeniable. A physical weight, $500,000. For a dinner. The words seemed to mock me from the page. It wasn't the money, not really. Mary Beth and I were financially stable, thriving in our careers. It was the sheer, calculated cruelty of the gesture, the final public degradation. Mr. Peterson, uncomfortable, cleared his throat and continued. Darlene, it turned out, was bequeathed everything else. The sprawling Albright mansion, the family businesses, the acres of farmland, and millions more in various accounts. She sat there absorbing the news, utterly unperturbed. A fresh wave of humiliation and anger washed over me, a bitter taste in my mouth. It was just like them. The favoritism, the blatant disregard, reaching beyond the grave to mock me one last time. Even in death, they had found a way to wound, to make their disdain crystal clear. Mary Beth squeezed my hand, her grip firm, a silent anchor in the storm of my emotions. Her face was a mask of shock and sympathy, her eyes meeting mine with a quiet understanding. She felt it too, the stinging injustice, the brutal indifference. Darlene, however, couldn't quite contain herself. As Mr. Peterson finished, a small, entitled smirk played on her lips. She looked at me, a flicker of triumph in her eyes. Her victory was now legally enshrined, validated by the very hand of our parents. I understood then, with a chilling clarity. The dinner. It wasn't just a bizarre inheritance. It was a final public slight, a deliberately cruel gesture designed not to provide for me, but to justify their lifetime of neglect, to make it clear that I was always lesser, always unwanted. It was their last cold word. Years turned into a decade, sliding by like corn silk through fingers. Mary Beth and I continued our successful medical careers, our days a blur of patient charts, hospital rounds, and evening calls. But the true heart of our life was at home, with Cody and Sarah Jean. They grew into bright, good-hearted kids, their laughter echoing through the house, their achievements, small victories on the baseball field, careful drawings from art class, honor roll certificates, filling us with a quiet pride. We were a unit, solid and predictable, built on shared values and unwavering love. Darlene, meanwhile, drifted through life, buoyed by the vast inheritance. She never once worked, her days a cycle of brunch, shopping, and lavish parties at the old mansion. Community gossip hummed around her, a constant, low-level drone. Did you hear about Darlene's latest car? Another party till dawn. Hank and Mary Beth maintained only the barest contact, mostly out of necessity for family events, finding her continued arrogance and self-entitlement almost unbearable. Her calls were always about something she needed, or some complaint about trivial matters. The whispers about her recklessness grew louder, more specific. Extravagant investments that seemed to disappear into thin air. A string of rumored affairs that left a trail of broken hearts in their wake. It was the kind of behavior that didn't surprise me anymore. It was just Darlene, amplified by unchecked wealth. One evening after putting the kids to bed, the house finally quiet, my phone buzzed. It was Gary Thompson, a good friend from the hospital, a kind, earnest man who worked as an anesthesiologist alongside Mary Beth. His voice was frantic, thick with tears, barely coherent. "Hank, can you talk? I don't know what to do." I moved to the kitchen, away from the sleeping children. "Gary, what's wrong? Take a breath." He confessed in halting, choked words to a year-long affair. It was with a married woman, he explained, a local socialite, someone known for her charm and expensive tastes. He was heartbroken, truly shattered, describing how she had suddenly cut him off, leaving him reeling. I thought she loved me, Hank. I thought this was real." I offered comfort, the usual advice about moving on, about healing, until, through sobs, Gary uttered her name. "It was Darlene Albright, Hank, your sister." The name hit me like a physical blow. Darlene, my own sister. A cold wave of disgust washed over me, not just for her careless infidelity, but for the callousness with which she had treated Gary, a decent man, a friend, the pain she'd inflicted so casually, so thoughtlessly. It was a stark reminder of the void where her empathy should have been. In the weeks that followed Gary's tearful confession, a different kind of shadow began to creep into our home. Mary Beth, usually so present, so engaged, started working longer shifts. She became increasingly withdrawn, her easy smiles replaced by a tired, distant look. She'd say she was exhausted from work, from the demands of the operating room, from the kids. I tried to talk to her, to ask what was really going on. "You seem different, honey," I'd say, reaching for her hand across the dinner table. But she was evasive, her answers vague, citing stress from her demanding schedule and the kids. "It's just residency, Hank," she'd say, "and trying to balance everything. It's a lot." But it felt like more than that. I started noticing subtle shifts. A new expensive perfume, not her usual scent. A delicate floral note I couldn't quite place. Quiet phone calls she'd take in the next room, her voice hushed, ending abruptly when I walked by. A sudden, insistent need for me time, for long walks alone, or evenings spent out with friends I couldn't quite name. My gut twisted with a growing unease, a cold dread creeping into the quiet corners of our once solid marriage. It was a feeling I knew, a familiar chill, but this time it was coming from within. Then one rainy Tuesday morning, as I was hanging her coat to dry, I found it. Tucked deep in a forgotten pocket was a receipt. A faded, crumpled receipt for a weekend getaway at a lakeside resort, dated 2 months prior. A date she hadn't spent with me. My mind raced, piecing together fragmented clues. The unexplained absences, the evasive answers, the new scent. A horrifying picture began to form, sickeningly clear. I remembered Mary Beth's increasingly close friendship with Dr. Ben Carter, a charming new surgeon who had joined the hospital staff a few months back. She'd often praised his understanding nature, his brilliant mind, the way he just got it, when she talked about the pressures of her work. My world, once so stable, felt like it was shifting beneath my feet. Listeners, stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. The suspicion became a gnawing worm, burrowing deep, keeping me awake at night. The quiet hours stretched, filled with the echo of unanswered questions. I couldn't just accuse, not without proof. So I started observing. Subtly, I thought. I watched Mary Beth at home, and then at the hospital, her interactions with Dr. Ben Carter. I caught their lingering glances across the cafeteria, eyes holding a fraction of a second too long. Their hushed conversations in the hospital hallways, heads bent close, a shared smile that felt too intimate, too casual for mere colleagues. There was a comfort between them, an ease that pricked at the fragile peace of my own marriage. Every small detail, every shared joke, every glance became a shard, embedding itself deeper. One rainy Tuesday, the kind where the sky hung low and gray, I made a decision. I told Mary Beth I had a late meeting, a complex case I needed to review. Instead, I left work early, my heart heavy with a dread I couldn't shake. I knew where I was going. There was a place, a secluded, out-of-the-way motel on the edge of town, the kind you heard whispers about from colleagues and patients alike. A place where discretion was the only selling point. My hands clenched the steering wheel, knuckles white. The rain was coming down harder now, blurring the windshield. As I pulled into the dimly lit parking lot, my breath hitched in my throat. There, in a back corner, parked discreetly, was Mary Beth's car. The old Ford Focus, familiar and suddenly alien. Right next to it, unmistakably, was Dr. Ben Carter's sleek black sedan. The world seemed to tilt, the rain-streaked asphalt spinning beneath my tires. I cut the engine. Overwhelmed, I just sat there in my truck, watching. A crushing weight of betrayal settled deep in my chest, a cold, sickening anchor. This was it, the proof I hadn't wanted to find. The truth I desperately hoped was a product of my own anxieties. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out, my fingers fumbling. It was a text from Mary Beth. "Are you okay, hun? You sounded tired earlier." My thumb hovered over the keyboard. Her reply came quickly, almost too quickly, as if she'd been expecting my message. "Just a tough day at the clinic. Home soon." A raw, hot fury boiled over in me. The lie, so casual, so practiced. It quickly dissolved, however, into a profound, desolate sadness. It was a sadness I'd only known in childhood, the quiet ache of being unseen, unheard, betrayed by the very people who were supposed to care. I waited. The minutes stretched, interminable, punctuated by the rhythmic drumming of rain on the roof. Finally, the door to one of the rooms opened. They emerged, walking side by side, their shoulders almost touching, laughing softly, a private moment, one that wasn't meant for me. I watched them get into their separate cars, saw the brief, lingering look Ben Carter gave Mary Beth before she pulled away. I waited a few more minutes, ensuring I wouldn't be seen, then quietly drove away, my life unraveling in the rearview mirror. That night, Mary Beth came home. She tried to act normal, humming a tune as she put her keys on the hook, asking about my meeting. But I could barely meet her eyes. My pain was a visible shroud, a heavy, unspoken presence in the room. We sat in the living room, the television a low murmur, the silence between us deafening. I took a deep breath. "Mary Beth," I said, my voice low but firm, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I know about you and Dr. Carter." Her face paled. Her composure, carefully constructed, crumbled instantly. The color drained from her cheeks, and her eyes welled up. She burst into tears, her body shaking with sobs. "Hank, I'm so sorry," she choked out, admitting everything in a torrent of guilt and shame. She confessed to feeling lost, she said, unappreciated. After years of dealing with my family's indifference, the constant chill, the subtle ways they minimized her, she'd been drawn to Ben's attention, his compliments, the way he seemed to truly see her. She called it a profound, desperate mistake, a moment of weakness, a search for something she felt was missing. I listened, numb. The foundations of my carefully built life, the house, the family, the marriage felt like they were cracking beneath me. The pain was almost physical, a familiar echo of past betrayals, louder this time, sharper because it came from the one person I had trusted completely. The raw confession hung heavy in the air between us, a toxic cloud that permeated every corner of our home. It had shattered the trust Mary Beth and I had so painstakingly built over 2 decades. The words she'd spoken, "I felt lost, unappreciated," rang with a bitter echo of my own childhood. Suddenly, the old wound of being an accident, the chilling indifference of Paul and Martha, resurfaced with shocking clarity. It was as if every past betrayal, every slight, every moment of feeling less than, had converged into this one devastating event. We entered a painful period of separation within our own home. The guest room became my refuge, a stark testament to the chasm that had opened between us. We moved through our days like polite strangers, speaking only of logistics, school pickups, grocery lists, patient schedules. The quiet laughter that once filled our house was replaced by a heavy silence, punctuated by the muted sounds of our separate lives. Cody and Sarah Jean, still young but keenly perceptive, noticed. "Why do Mommy and Daddy seem so sad all the time?" Cody asked one evening, his brow furrowed with concern. Sarah Jean simply clung to Mary Beth's leg a little tighter, her eyes wide. Their innocent questions were like daggers, piercing through my own self-pity, reminding me of the greater cost. I wrestled with a terrible internal conflict. My deep love for Mary Beth, the woman who had been my anchor, my partner, the mother of my children, warred fiercely with the searing wound of her infidelity. It was a battle fought in the dark hours of the night, replaying every memory, every lie, every moment of perceived happiness that was now tainted. Mary Beth, consumed by remorse, pleaded for forgiveness. Her eyes, red and swollen from tears, mirrored a genuine desperation. "Please, Hank," she'd whisper, her voice raw. "I made a terrible mistake. I want to mend our family. I want to make things right." Her sincerity was palpable, but the hurt was a physical barrier between us. I saw the bitter irony of it all. I had fought so hard for genuine love, for authenticity, for a life free from the cold, calculating manipulations of my parents. I had built a family on trust and mutual respect, only to face betrayal in the most intimate part of my life. It felt like a cosmic joke, a cruel twist of fate. But then I recalled my solemn promise to my children, the vow I had made to myself the day Cody was born, to break the cycle of unhappiness and indifference that had plagued my own childhood, to give them a whole, loving family, to protect them from the kind of emotional wounds I carried. Their innocent need for a whole family, for a stable home, became a powerful, undeniable force. After weeks of agonizing reflection, and with their quiet, unwavering plea in my mind, I decided to try. To try and forgive Mary Beth. It was not a grand, romantic gesture, but a hard, deliberate choice born of necessity and a deep-seated desire to preserve the family we had built. We began couples therapy. It was a painstaking, difficult journey. We sat across from each other, guided by a quiet, observant therapist, unpacking years of unspoken resentment, of small hurts accumulated over time, of communication breakdowns we hadn't even recognized. It was brick by painful brick, a slow and arduous process of rebuilding. Professionally, I confronted Dr. Ben Carter. It was a measured conversation devoid of personal animosity, focused solely on ensuring his actions would not further disrupt our shared workplace or the lives of our patients. He listened, his face impassive, and acknowledged his error. Then Darlene called. Vague rumors of our marital strife had reached her, as they always did. "Hank," she drawled, her voice dripping with callous, self-serving advice, "you need to handle this. Show her who's boss. Don't let her walk all over you." There was no empathy, no concern for my pain, only a detached, almost gleeful interest in the drama. Disgusted, I hung up on her, severing the last fragile thread of family connection. Her moral compass was utterly broken, and I was finally done pretending otherwise. Mary Beth and I, scarred but resolute, decided to stay together. We were committed to forging a future built on brutal honesty, however arduous the path. The pay the price wasn't just the affair itself, but the arduous, continuous journey of rebuilding trust, day by painful day. Our journey was slow and hard, filled with setbacks and moments of despair. But through it all, I came to understand that true morality wasn't about vengeance or retribution. It was about the difficult, courageous choice to mend what's broken, to protect the love I cherished, even if it meant carrying the scars of betrayal. It was about choosing to build, rather than destroy, in the quiet heartland of our lives. The story of Hank Albright is a Midwestern tale, plain and unvarnished, about the lasting grip of family history. He carried the scars of childhood neglect and public humiliation, a burden passed down from parents who measured love with an unforgiving scale. Yet, Hank fought to build a life on different terms, choosing honest love and unwavering dedication to his own children. His journey, however, wasn't a clean break. The echoes of past betrayals lingered, testing the very foundation of his carefully constructed world. In the end, Hank faced a stark choice: succumb to bitterness or choose the harder path of forgiveness, driven by the innocent faces of his children. It was a choice that demanded profound strength, a commitment to mend what was broken, even if the repairs would always show. The scars remained, a quiet testament to the enduring cost of both cruelty and compassion in the heartland.